My son Flavio became seriously ill and needed surgery. I was a single mother. My husband had died 2 years previously from the same illness. At the time, our son was 8 years old and was deeply affected by the loss. A few months ago, he fell ill. The illness was passed on to him. Now, I was desperately fighting for my son's life. He was my only child. I had married early, had just finished school, and was only 18. My future husband impressed me with his appearance. He was a handsome man. I myself was known for my beauty in our small town. I was a very attractive girl, with long black hair and big brown eyes. All the boys ran after me, but I kept them at a distance, believing that none of them were worthy of me. Yes, I looked down on everyone and repelled them with my coldness and arrogance. I had few friends. They predicted that I would have a career as an actress, singer, or model, but things turned out differently. When I saw Javier, I fell in love at first sight. The man, 17 years older than me, also fell madly in love with me. We began a passionate romance, and within a month, we announced our engagement. A month later, we had a lavish wedding. Javier was a wealthy man and spared no expense on the ceremony. Everything was unfolding like a beautiful fairy tale. The newlyweds went on vacation to the islands and came back even happier and more in love. I fell pregnant almost immediately and gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. I had to forget about my career, but I was happy and loved my roles as wife and mother. My husband adored me. He worked hard, and his business brought in a good income. When our son grew up and turned 4, I wanted to do something more. I'd always liked drawing and thought about studying to become an artist. My husband didn't object, and I started going to art classes to prepare for my exams and to go to college. Everything was going perfectly. Teachers praised me and said I had a bright future. I managed to get into college and happily threw myself into my studies. Now I had everything I had dreamed of: a loving husband, a son, a house, and an occupation that made me feel alive. I felt happy, and every day brought me joy. The only thing that made me a little sad was that I had no friends. My school friends lived far away. My husband and I moved to the capital as soon as we got married. The other girls in my group were younger, and I didn't know what to say to them. What's more, I still behaved in a reserved and distant way. Of course, my son went to school, but even there, I couldn't make friends with the other mothers. They had completely different interests. However, I wasn't that desperate. All my time was dedicated to family and creativity. In my final year, I was offered a job. After defending my diploma, I was ready to be accepted as a painting teacher in a children's art studio. After consulting Javier, I agreed. I would have my own business and my own income, which I could spend however I wanted. How could it be better? I was looking forward to the future with joy and anticipation. Then the unexpected happened. Javier became seriously ill. All the money he had saved for a new house and to expand his business had to be spent on treatment, but it didn't help. Javier languished like the flame of a fine candle burning out. I couldn't believe what was happening. In less than 6 months, Javier had gone from a flourishing young man to a feeble old man. There was nothing the doctors could do. Javier passed away. I mourned the loss bitterly. I never took my exams or defended my degree. I had to quickly find a job to support my son. My parents helped me as much as they could, but I didn't want to depend on them. I understood that I was alone and that all the responsibility for my son was on my shoulders. A year passed, and I managed to improve our financial situation. I had enough money to pay my son's bills and school fees, buy him clothes, and even go to the movies on weekends, to children's entertainment centers, amusement parks, and the zoo. Life was slowly returning to normal. I even started painting again, indulging in it during my free time. The wound left by my husband's death still hadn't healed in my heart. I loved him very much. I poured all my pain, loneliness, and unexpressed emotions into paintings of impressive depth. Everyone who saw them promised a great future, speaking of my talent. I was already thinking about my own exhibitions when suddenly a new misfortune struck. Flavio fell ill. I was horrified. I was afraid that history would repeat itself, and that the boy would also leave me forever. I knew I wouldn't survive another loss. The doctors said they would do everything they could, but they couldn't avoid surgery. A lot of money was needed to make it happen. I found a second job, but it still wasn't enough, so I started selling the things my husband had given me. They were gold decorations that were dear to me as a souvenir. I would never have parted with them under any other circumstances, but now I had no choice. In addition, I contacted my old teachers from college, asking them to find buyers for my paintings. They sympathized with my situation and promised to help. It wasn't even a week before a very wealthy patron called me and bought all my paintings. I was very grateful to him, but the money raised was still not enough. I was on the verge of despair and put my house up for sale. I visited Flavio every day. The hospital where he was located was only a few blocks from my workplace, so as soon as I said goodbye to my last client, I grabbed my bag and walked to my son. One day in front of the hospital, I stopped at the traffic lights and noticed an old lady nearby. She was trying to cross the road at a red light. Apparently, the lady was very old and didn't understand what she was doing. Perhaps her relatives were already looking for her. I approached her and asked aloud if she needed any help. She looked at me and I could see tears in her eyes. "I got lost," she admitted. "My granddaughter and I went to the store and she asked me to wait in the car, but she took so long that I got worried and went looking for her and ended up here. I need to find my granddaughter." I took the lady by the arm and when the light turned green, led her across the street. "What was the name of the store?" "Oh, I don't remember anymore. A big one. It had a very bright window." I thought it might be the huge supermarket on the corner and took the lady there. As we approached the store, I immediately noticed a young woman pacing back and forth in the parking lot, waving her hands and calling out to someone. Maybe that's the lady's granddaughter, I thought. I took the lady to the young woman. When she saw us, she stopped and smiled happily. "Grandma, there you are. Where have you been? I've been looking for you for half an hour." The lady smiled shyly like a mischievous little girl. "I was over there," she said, waving in the direction we'd come from. "I hope you didn't cross the street at a red light." The lady made an innocent face. "No, of course not, dear. This beautiful young woman here has helped me a lot." The young woman thanked me and I smiled and waved back, handing the lady over to her granddaughter. I hurried back to the hospital. Flavio must have been waiting for me. I didn't realize that someone had been watching me intently all this time. When I arrived at the hospital and entered the building, he waited a while and followed me. The next day I had a day off, my first in months. I didn't want to take it, but my boss, an elderly gray-haired man called Mr. Gonzalez, insisted. "If you keep working at this rate, you'll end up in the hospital bed next to your son." "Is that what you want?" he asked sternly when I handed over some documents. I shook my head. "Then please make sure I don't see you in these walls tomorrow. Go for a walk in the park or read a book and don't even think about working an extra shift at your second job." "I'll find out." Mr. Gonzalez was a kind and fair leader. He sympathized with my story, knowing about my past. Mr. Gonzalez had also lost his wife early and never recovered from the loss. He was still lonely and spent most of his time at work. However, he didn't want the same fate for me. The next day, I woke up at 10 a.m. Tiredness was taking its toll. I got up and went to the kitchen to make some coffee. The hospital's visiting hours started in the afternoon and lasted until the evening, so I didn't have to rush and could devote a few hours to myself. However, I couldn't stop thinking about poor Flavio, who missed me terribly at the hospital and kept asking when he could come home. "Soon, my darling, soon," I reassured him, even though my heart was breaking with sadness. I did my best to stand firm and not show my son that I was afraid of losing him. I had to believe and pass on my confidence to the boy. It would give him the strength to fight the disease. I repeated these words to myself over and over again. "I'm not going to die like Dad, am I?" Flavio asked again, and I leaned towards him, kissed him gently on the forehead, and shook my head. "Of course not," I replied. "You're going to live for a long, long time." "And what will I be when I grow up?" the boy asked with his eyes shining. This was our favorite game. I already knew that he dreamed of being a soccer player. "You're going to play for our country and break the world record for the most goals scored." That was the answer he expected to hear every time, and when I replied, his face lit up with a happy smile and he fell asleep peacefully. I left the room slowly, holding back my tears, and went home. I knew it would happen again the next day and the next, and that gave some stability to my unstable world. If only I could sell the house and raise the remaining money for the surgery, I thought. I waited every minute for calls from buyers, but there were none. Of course, the house was expensive and located in a very prestigious area, but I hoped that buyers would arrive very soon. At that moment, while I was thinking about it, sipping coffee from a white porcelain cup, I heard the sound of a message. I even surprised myself and picked up the phone in a hurry. "Please let it be from the buyers," I whispered softly. The number the message came from was unknown to me. I began to read, and, as I finished, tears streamed down my face. I closed my eyes and memories of my youth swirled in a whirlwind of bright images from the distant past. I was 17 when I saw that modest, red-haired boy for the first time. His family had recently moved to our town, and he was the new student in my class. When he walked awkwardly into the classroom, all eyes turned to him. He had an open, simple face with freckles, and he limped. The limp was the result of a childhood injury, as I later discovered. "Meet Rafael Silvio. He will now be studying in our class." The old teacher, Mrs. Down Sanchez, introduced the boy. She was very kind and cheerful and wanted the children to accept Rafael into the group. "Sit in the third row, near the window, Rafael," the teacher said. "There's an empty seat next to Renata." I always sat alone because my friends, who were just as pretty and popular as me, were in another class. I had no friends among my classmates and didn't allow anyone to sit next to me. When I heard what Mrs. Sanchez said, I lifted my chin and said graciously, "No, he's not going to sit here." I thought the teacher wouldn't answer and would simply put the boy somewhere else, but the teacher unexpectedly became angry, which was uncharacteristic of her. "If I said Rafael will sit here, then he will," the teacher said firmly. I was furious and turned to the window. Rafael, red as a tomato, walked down the aisle and fell heavily into the chair next to me, accidentally bumping into my elbow. "Can you be more careful?" I whispered, moving as far away from him as possible. "Sorry," he replied, and to my surprise, I realized that he had a very pleasant, low voice. He began to take worn books out of his backpack, apparently inherited from an older brother. Then he placed a notebook and a pen and pencil case in front of him and listened attentively to the teacher. When it was time to take notes on the new material, he carefully held the pen in his left hand and began to write. I involuntarily glanced at his notebook. Rafael had very beautiful handwriting. I raised my eyebrows in surprise, but said nothing. When the bell rang for recess, I stood up abruptly, making the boy almost jump in his seat. He was in a hurry to let me pass and was so clumsy that he bumped into the table several times on his way out. I just pursed my lips and, lifting my head, left the classroom. I found my friends and vividly recounted the humiliation I'd had to endure because of the new boy. "Is he at least handsome?" Clara, one of my friends, asked indifferently. "He's awful. He's just ugly," I replied. "Red-haired, freckled, clumsy, and, to top it off, lame." "Lucky, huh?" My friends laughed. "You're certainly not jealous of her," I replied. Just then, the bell rang and I went back to class. The redhead was still sitting in his usual place, leaning over the desk. I noticed that he was drawing something in his notebook. As I passed my seat, I quickly glanced at the boy's drawing. He had drawn a wolf with a simple pencil. I noticed that the wolf looked real. I had loved drawing back then, but I had never managed to achieve such a likeness. I looked at my red-haired neighbor with a new perspective, but said nothing. My position as queen, accustomed by myself and others, didn't allow me to show friendly feelings for someone like Rafael. However, he didn't know that. He liked me at first sight. In math class, a subject he never liked, Rafael opened a clean sheet of paper in his notebook and, looking sideways, carefully drew my profile. He sketched my features on the sheet: a slightly pointed nose, big eyes, long eyelashes, a delicate chin, arched eyebrows, and long black hair. The portrait was more than similar to the original, and Rafael, satisfied, signed off on it. Then he tore the sheet out of his notebook and placed it in front of me. I looked at the drawing in surprise. I immediately recognized myself in it, and the portrait flattered me greatly. However, I remained silent once again. Rafael wrote on a clean sheet of paper, "Did you like it?" I replied, "Am I that ugly? You draw worse than a 5-year-old." I could tell that Rafael was upset to read my words, but I didn't feel a twinge of guilt. "That's how you should treat people like him," Let him know his place, I thought. I was used to treating boys like that. However, Raphael didn't give up. The next day, he brought a bouquet of daisies to school with a note and put it on my desk. I read the beautifully written words. "The beauty of these flowers cannot compare to yours," classmates whispered and pointed at me and Raphael, who blushed with embarrassment. I threw the bouquet out of the open window and looked defiantly at Raphael. He smiled sadly, but remained silent. We spent the whole day again sitting side by side without saying a word. The next day, it happened again. We sat in complete silence once again. During literature class, my pen stopped working and Raphael noticed. He handed me his pen. I didn't want to take it, but I had no choice. My grades in that subject weren't good, and I didn't want to make matters worse by not taking the exam. After class, Raphael waited for me at the school entrance. I went out with my friends and pretended not to know him. Raphael, limping, blocked our way. "Can I walk you home?" he asked boldly, looking only at me. I crossed my arms and shook my head. "Not at all. Are you blind? I'm going home with my friends," I replied defiantly. Raphael nodded and walked away with a limp. He watched the girls laughing for a long time. "He's so weird," Clara said, and I agreed. "Is he in love with you?" Pilar, the girl with the long bangs, asked. "Of course," I confirmed darkly. "Oh my God, couldn't you find a better Prince Charming?" my friends exclaimed, and I groaned in response. "Stop laughing at me. You should feel sorry for me. I have to sit next to him in the same desk." As I said this, I remembered Raphael's wonderful drawings and felt a little ashamed of my harsh words, but quickly pushed the thought away. "Nobody dares go near Renata Martinez," I declared proudly out loud, "especially someone like him." Then something happened. It was Sunday, and I went to the park to meet my friends. The warm, windless day was approaching sunset. I spread out a towel and lay on it, lazily sipping lemonade through colorful straws. Suddenly, I noticed Raphael. He was limping, walking through the park. In his hands, he held a sketchbook and a pencil case. He sat down on a bench near the fountain and began to draw. My friends also noticed the redhead and started laughing. I asked them to stop, but they wouldn't calm down. So I got up and left, saying that they weren't my friends anymore. They remained silent, surprised by my reaction. I didn't want to go home. I walked deeper into the park, where there was an old movie theater, and bought a ticket for the evening showing. The movie was very romantic, and at the end, when the main character died, leaving his young wife to mourn, I cried. Deep down, I was very sentimental at the time. I didn't know that fate would put me through something similar in real life. As I left the cinema, I took a deep breath of the warm night air, filled with the scent of flowers, and throwing a scarf over my shoulders, I headed home. I didn't know that Raphael had also been at the movies and was now following me. I'd never been home alone so late before. I was always with my friends. I felt very uncomfortable, and deciding to take a shortcut, I turned into an unfamiliar street, which was also poorly lit. My footsteps echoed loudly in the silence. People in our town went to bed early. I could hear my heart beating loudly. Suddenly, a huge black dog jumped out of the bushes and growled at me, showing its sharp teeth. I stopped in fear. The dog barked loudly. I felt a sticky fear take hold of me. Since childhood, I had been terribly afraid of dogs. The dog moved towards my feet when suddenly something hit it on the head. Surprised, I saw that it was a familiar pencil case. I turned and saw Raphael coming quickly towards me, his eyes glowing feverishly in the darkness. The dog growled again. It seemed that the blow from the pencil case had irritated him. Raphael protected me. "Run home!" he shouted without turning around. I ran. The dog barked loudly. I didn't look back until I reached a well-lit street. I took a deep breath and slowed down. Raphael had saved me. Maybe I shouldn't leave him alone. Maybe I should call for help. I looked around, but there was no one around. Everyone had already gone home. I had no choice but to go home alone. The next day, Raphael came to school with his left arm bandaged. "What happened to you, dear?" "Mrs. Sanchez exclaimed, raising her hands. "Just a little incident." Raphael replied and limped to his seat. Now he's not just lame, someone laughed. I barely kept myself from turning around. I couldn't lose face in class. My reputation had to remain intact. I remained silent. Raphael sat down next to me and looked at me from under his red bangs. I pretended not to notice. The usual lesson began. "Don't you even want to thank me?" Raphael wrote on a piece of paper. I bit my lip. "Thank you," I wrote back. Raphael smiled. We didn't exchange any more notes. After class, he waited for me at the entrance again. This time I went out alone. I was still upset with my friends. Following me out of the school, my classmates came out. They watched curiously as Raphael, limping, approached me. "Do you want me to walk with you? What if you meet that evil dog again on the way?" I didn't want to hurt Raphael's feelings, especially after what he'd done for me. But then I heard a chuckle behind me. "Look, he's her faithful knight," someone in the class said. "If I show weakness, it's over for me," I thought. I raised my head and replied coldly, "I'm sorry, but I don't go the same way as disabled people." With that, I proudly walked past him, without even looking at Raphael. He stood there, hurt and sad, his face perplexed. We never saw each other again. Raphael didn't come to school the next day, nor the day after that, nor the day after that. Later, I learned that he had transferred to another school, but I didn't want to think it was because of me. I remembered the gentle red-haired boy for a long time and hoped that his hand had healed so that he could draw his magical illustrations. And then I met Javier and completely forgot about Raphael and everything to do with him. Now 10 years later, I've received a message from him. All this time, I thought Renata Martinez had no heart, and it was only yesterday, seeing how you helped the old lady, that I realized it wasn't true, he wrote, signing off as Rafael Silvio, whom you once called a lame cripple. I felt embarrassed recalling that episode from my youth, but it was all because of the fears that had haunted me since childhood. Sighing, I typed in reply, "I'm sorry, Raphael. That was very cruel of me. I'm really sorry." The reply came almost instantly. "If you want to make amends, we could meet tonight. I know your son is ill, and I'd like to help." Reading that, I was stunned. How did he know? I replied hastily, "Of course, I'd appreciate any help." The display almost immediately showed a new message. "So, let's meet at 6:30 in Central Park." I calculated the time and distance and answered with a yes. Then I took a shower, got dressed, and went to the hospital. Walking down the street, I was surprised to notice that something had changed inside me with the reappearance of red-haired Raphael in my life. Hope sprang up in my heart. Flavio was eager to see me. He brought his favorite marmalades, milkshakes, and marshmallows. The boy devoured the treats with his mouth full and wondered what was going on outside the hospital walls, turning his attention to the future. It was the only thing that brought him joy. Flavio dreamed of a future where he would be healthy again. Watching my son, I could hardly hold back the tears, but I knew I couldn't cry in front of him. I couldn't undermine his faith. I had to be strong. I sat with my son for a long time, and when I left the hospital, I had little time to get to the park, where I was supposed to meet Raphael. I hadn't walked calmly through the city for a long time. I was always rushing to work or going to the hospital to see my son. Now, for the first time in a long time, I was alone. I straightened my shoulders, took a deep breath, and was surprised to realize that I had almost forgotten what it was like. The relaxed, serene state of mind had only been a dream for me until then. I was enjoying these moments. Somehow, I managed to momentarily forget my problems. Perhaps it was because of Raphael. After all, he was a memory of my carefree youth. I walked quietly to the park, inhaling the scent of the flowers and thinking about the girl I used to be. Finally, I reached the central entrance where the golden lanterns were already lit. I smiled. The park looked so cozy. I entered and walked slowly towards the fountain along a wide, colorful avenue. I still had plenty of time, so I was very surprised when I saw a lone figure near the fountain. I immediately recognized Raphael by his bright red hair. He noticed me too and got up from the bench and walked towards me. He was still limping, but now he didn't want to notice. I looked closely at his face. What had he become? Was he still the same kind guy as before? "Hello, Renata," he murmured, coming closer. I immediately recognized his pleasant, low voice. "Hi, Raphael," I replied with a slightly embarrassed smile. He smiled back. "You called me by name for the first time," he admitted. Raphael hadn't changed much. I even thought he was wearing the same simple shirt and pants he wore at school. Of course, that couldn't be true. Raphael had grown and become even taller, but he hadn't changed his style. We sat on the bench, but the conversation didn't flow. The past stood between us like a wall. The hurt I had caused Raphael seemed to hang in the air. Decided, I threw my hair back, as if to break the silence. "Raphael, I owe you an apology. My behavior was horrible. You saved me from that ferocious dog at the expense of yourself, and I was so ungrateful." Raphael listened in silence, tilting his head slightly. "I couldn't draw for a long time," he confessed. "My hand just wouldn't heal." "I'm sorry," I repeated sincerely. "But why?" Raphael asked after a long silence. I looked at him confused. "Why did you want to appear cold and arrogant? I could see that deep down you were different," he continued. I lowered my head. "It's all because of my mother," I said softly. Raphael raised his eyebrows in confusion. "What does she have to do with it?" The fountain whispered softly behind us. I took a deep breath and began to speak. "When my mother was at school, something terrible happened to her. She fell in love with a classmate in her final year, but he cheated on her. It was just a game to him. My mother got pregnant. Luckily, she had a best friend who loved her very much. When he found out, he offered her his hand and heart to save the situation. My mother agreed and married him. So I was born, and my mother's friend became my father. I didn't know this until I was 13, but one day my mother plucked up the courage and told me everything. She was very afraid that the same thing would happen to me." Raphael's face became tense. I could see it in the light of the lanterns. He clenched his fists involuntarily as he listened to me. "My mother advised me to behave in a cold and distant way so that no boy would ever dare come near me. That's how I became a queen who should never step down from her pedestal. And then you came along, just an ordinary boy. Queens don't have friends. People like you. If I allowed it, I would become a very ordinary girl, and that was dangerous. I was really afraid of repeating my mother's fate." Raphael just nodded in response. "Now I understand everything," he replied bitterly. "I don't blame you anymore. Everyone has their own story behind them. You did the right thing by trying to protect yourself, but fate can't be helped." I still fell madly in love, even if not with my classmate. However, I was luckier than my mother. "He turned out to be a decent person," I said, but the bitterness and sadness echoed in my words. "Are you still with him?" Raphael asked softly, not noticing the disappointed tone in my voice. "He passed away," I replied simply. Raphael squeezed my hand gently. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I nodded silently. "Now I'm really scared of losing my son," I whispered softly. Raphael squeezed my hand even tighter. "Renata, I'm sorry, but I followed you yesterday," he confessed. "I was surprised when you entered the hospital building. I thought you might work there. I really wanted to know something about you and your life. Perhaps you've already realized that I haven't forgotten about you." "I didn't think you still remembered me," she said in surprise. Raphael bowed his head in shame. "I don't think a day has gone by when I haven't thought about you. Your eyes, your hair, your smile. All this has left a permanent mark on my heart," he confessed. I looked at him in surprise. "But I don't want you to get hung up on that. I'm not here to pressure you into anything. I really want to help," he continued. I knew Raphael was telling the truth, and I listened carefully. "Yesterday, I followed you to the hospital and asked about you at reception. The attendant was surprised and reluctant to say anything, but I explained that I'm an old friend of yours and I just want to help. Then she almost cried and told me that her little boy was ill. "Yes, Dona Domingo is very kind and sentimental," I acknowledged. After a pause, I added, "But how can you help?" "If you need money for the operation, I can get it for you. My friend is a wealthy businessman." "It's nothing to him," said Raphael. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Raphael, are you sure? It's a considerable amount." He nodded firmly. I'm sure it will help. I lit up with happiness and, unable to contain myself, hugged Raphael. Thank you, you're a real angel, my guardian angel. Every time you appear in my life, you save me. Raphael was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. Listen, Renata, you must be hungry. I think you came straight from the hospital. Let's go somewhere for a coffee and something to eat. On me. I looked at Raphael, full of sincere gratitude. Thank you for your care, but I feel terribly uncomfortable. You're doing so much for me. Raphael just waved his hand. It's nothing. He got up from the bench and offered me his hand. I took it, and he helped me up, then let go immediately, although his attitude showed that he didn't want to. However, I couldn't think of anything but my son and the impending surgery. I had made it. I was incredibly lucky. How happy Flavio would be. The doctor said that if the surgery was done soon, he would recover very quickly and return to normal life. I walked through the park alongside Raphael, feeling like wings had grown on my back. We spent a quiet, cozy evening in a cafe near the park. Raphael offered me cappuccino and croissants with cream cheese and blueberries. For the first time in a long time, I had an appetite. Suddenly, I realized that I knew nothing about his life. Rafa, I'm sorry. I'm such a selfish person. I didn't even ask about your life and what you do. Raphael lowered his gaze modestly. I'm just an ordinary artist, he said. Oh, that's wonderful, I exclaimed. I envy you so much. Envy of the purest kind, of course. I also studied to be an artist, although I never finished college. As I spoke, I swallowed the lump that had formed in my throat. Raphael understood everything and quickly changed the subject. So what kind of paintings do you create? He asked. I shook my head, taking a blueberry from my plate. None at the moment. Before, I used to pour my unrealized emotions onto the canvas. Raphael nodded, understanding. He looked at me with admiration, love shining in his eyes, although I didn't notice, too absorbed in myself. Can I see what you've created? He asked cautiously. I shook my head. I sold all my paintings. I was lucky that someone was willing to buy them. Raphael sighed. Who was it? A wealthy patron, Mr. Silvio Torres. I still have his card. I searched through my bag and handed Raphael a gold business card. Maybe he'll be interested in your paintings too. You're a wonderful artist. I still haven't forgotten the wolf you drew in the notebook. Raphael smiled and put the card in his pocket. I was pleased to be able to do something for him too. We spent a while in the cafe, and then Raphael walked me home. You must be tired, I said worriedly, but he shook his head. My limp doesn't stop me from living a full life. I go for a walk and I don't refuse anything, he admitted. I smiled. We were already at the door of my house. I thanked him for the wonderful evening and for his help. My friend will send a check tomorrow, Raphael said seriously. I know the surgery can't wait. Just give me the address. I thanked my old friend again and wrote down the address of my office on a piece of paper torn from my notebook. Raphael hugged me and walked down the street. I went home, took a hot shower, brushed my teeth, put on my pajamas, and went to bed. For the first time in a long time, I instantly fell asleep in a calm and serene sleep. I dreamt that Raphael, Flavio, and I were driving along the sea in a big, comfortable car. I've never traveled so far before, Flavio confessed with a cheerful laugh. Raphael momentarily took his eyes off the road to smile at him in the mirror. I felt a happy smile on my face too. With that smile, I woke up 5 minutes before the alarm. I quickly got ready and went to the office. As I entered, the receptionist said there was an envelope for me. My heart pounded. So fast? Raphael seemed like a real magician to me. I took the envelope. Inside was a check for the amount I needed. Excited, I ran to Mr. Gonzalez's office to request a short leave of absence from work. When I found out why, the boss allowed me to take another day off. I rushed to the hospital. The doctors were surprised that I had managed to raise the necessary amount so quickly. I found Flavio and happily shared the wonderful news with him. So I'll have the surgery tomorrow? He enthused. Then the boy paused for a moment and added anxiously, It won't hurt, will it? Don't worry, darling. During the surgery, you'll be asleep and won't feel a thing, I reassured him. I stayed with my son for a long time, and then I was asked to leave. He needed to prepare for the operation. I was very anxious for the rest of the day. Raphael sent me a message. "Did you get the check? Is everything okay?" I replied, "Yes, thank you again. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow." Raphael replied that everything would be fine. The next day, I wasn't allowed to see my son before the operation. In the evening, I received a call from the doctor. He said Flavio was fine. The surgery had been more than successful, and the boy had reacted very well. "You'll be able to see him tomorrow morning," said the doctor. "He'll be under our observation for another week, and then we'll probably send him home." Home. "Thank you very much, doctor." "That's wonderful news," I replied. I felt very light and happy in my heart. I sent Raphael a message and shared the good news with him. He was very happy for me and asked if I was free in the evening. "Yes," I replied. "I'd like to show you something," I read in Raphael's message. "Okay," I agreed. "I'll pick you up at 7 p.m. if that's okay," Raphael wrote. "Great, I finish work at that time. I'll wait for you at the office entrance," I replied. When it was almost time, I organized my papers, got up from the desk, and went to the mirror. I didn't know where Raphael was taking me. Was this a date? I looked at myself. I was wearing a soft blue blouse and a black skirt. I took the lipstick from my bag and applied it to my lips, then combed my hair. I was ready. As I left the office, I immediately saw Raphael. He was waiting for me near the parking lot, wearing ordinary pants and a striped shirt. I breathed a sigh of relief. He definitely wasn't going to take me to a fancy restaurant. I felt light and happy inside. As I approached, Raphael kissed me on the cheek and, holding my hand, led me to the car. I looked surprised when he opened the door of an expensive black car. Is that really his car? I thought, but I didn't say anything out loud. Raphael drove me through the illuminated streets of the city and stopped at a 4-story building. We got out of the car and took the elevator to the top floor. I had no idea where we were, but when Raphael opened the door for me, I smelled paint. "Is this your studio?" I guessed. Raphael turned on the light and confirmed it. "Yes, that's where I work." "How beautiful!" I exclaimed. Then I noticed something that made me gasp. I couldn't believe my eyes. Raphael's studio was full of my paintings. "But how is that possible? Where did you get them?" "I bought them from your patron," Raphael replied with a smile. I thought I'd heard wrong. "Really? But where did you get so much money?" Raphael looked into my eyes. "I have to confess, Renata, I don't have any business friends. I was the one who sent the check." I covered my mouth in surprise. "Yes, I've become very rich thanks to my paintings. They now sell for a lot of money. I run my own art business, but I spend most of my time painting." "You're so impressive," she said in admiration. "You too can fulfill your dream and continue painting," Raphael said passionately. "I'll definitely help you." I moved closer, but asked quietly, "Why are you doing this?" Raphael looked deeply into my eyes and dared to run his hand through my hair. "Because I love you." With those words, he moved closer and kissed me. I responded to the kiss and realized that my dream of a trip to the sea would definitely come true.